Hey guys, tonight we are wandering down the sandy streets of Timbuktu, that shimmering city of the Mali Empire, where camel hooves kick up golden dust and merchants mutter about spices, gold, and gossip. You weave past leather workers hammering hide, scribes dipping their pens into dark ink, and children balancing gourds of water on their heads, as if they were trained circus performers, though no one here has heard of a circus. A breeze carries the scent of fried millet cakes, and suddenly, in the chatter of merchants, you catch whispers of something even grander. A banquet, one of those legendary gatherings where rice bowls tower higher than most people, and where your humble stomach has no chance of winning the battle. You probably won't survive this, at least not without loosening your belt. The scale of these banquets will put modern buffet restaurants to shame, and if you think you can handle bottomless brunch, just wait until you see what counts as a light snack from Molly's court. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing those little location check-ins. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, guided by the gentle glow of oil lamps lining the street, their light flickering against mud brick walls smooth with clay. The city is alive with anticipation. Musicians tune their chorus, drummers tighten skins over hollow gourds, and the faint sound of chanting drifts from a nearby mosque. You glance up and see the sky purpling toward night, stars pricking the horizon one by one like sequins being stitched into fabric. The crowd thins as you move toward the palace quarter, where carved wooden doors swing open just long enough to reveal flashes of movement inside, servants rushing past, balancing bowls that steam with fragrant rice. The bowls themselves look comical in their enormity, like someone took an ordinary kitchen pot and told blacksmith, "Please enlarge this by a factor of 20. Historians still argue whether such bowls were purely ceremonial exaggerations in travelers' accounts, or whether they truly reached these towering proportions. But every chronicler from Ibn Battuta to later French visitors swore the feasts were massive, so either everyone was exaggerating together, or there was some kernel, some grain, of truth. You let your imagination wander. The rice arrives not in neat little portions like modern catering trays, but in great mounds, steaming and perfumed with spices from faraway markets. Cinnamon from the north, cloves carried across deserts, and cardamom seeds that somehow survived the rough journey strapped to camel saddles. Each grain glistens as if polished. And sitting atop those mounds, meat, fish, sauces, sometimes even sweet garnishes of honey or dried fruit. A single platter could weigh more than a modern suitcase, and you know how baggage fees go. The people you pass along the way are buzzing with anticipation. Farmers in patched tunics talk about how this season's harvest went better than expected, which means fuller bowls. Merchants brag about the salt bricks they traded, soon to crumble into stews. One man pulls you aside with a wink, whispering that sometimes the rice bowls are so tall children get lost circling them, as if it's a mountain trail. He's clearly joking, but also you're not entirely sure. Your feet crunch on gravel as you approach the palace courtyard. Lamps here are brighter, guarded by bronze holders shaped like lions. The walls gleam with the residue of countless feasts past. Wine stains, smoke from torches, the faint shadow of banners long gone. Tonight, another one of those great gatherings is about to begin, and you feel as if you've stumbled into a moment between legend and reality. Somewhere nearby, a griot clears his throat, ready to sing the Empire's story in verse. A drummer lets out a quick flourish, almost as if testing the air, and you, standing among courtiers, merchants, and visitors from across deserts and rivers, find yourself at the edge of a night you won't soon forget. Because when the rice arrives, enormous, steaming, nearly mythical, you will not only eat, you will listen, you will watch. You will become part of the strange, shimmering fabric of the Mali Empire's banquets, where food is more than survival. It's power, it's performance, and it's the kind of excess that makes even modern all-you-can-eat buffets seem modest. You weave deeper into the palace quarter, the chatter around you shifting from neighborhood gossip to the hushed tones of wealth and ambition. The scent of burning frankincense tickles your nose, and beyond the walls you glimpse the first signs of what has made the Mali Empire famous across continents. Gold. Not trinkets or jewelry scattered lightly, but cartloads of the stuff, glinting in torchlight as porters heave sacks onto wooden platforms. These caravans have traveled for weeks, even months, across dunes and savannas, and now their burden is being unloaded to help feed the Empire's greatest show of generosity. You sidestep a mule laden with brass pots and watch as coins spill briefly into the dirt. No one seems terribly alarmed. After all, gold here flows like water. Historians note that under Musa Musa, Mali produced nearly half of the known world supply, and those shimmering nuggets helped build mosques, fund schools, and, crucially, fill banquet tables. And yet, the quirky part is how casually this abundance was treated. Accounts describe servants brushing grains of gold dust off their tunics, like you might flick away breadcrumbs. Ahead of you, the caravan masters unroll long mats, spreading them beside sacks of rice that dwarf your imagination. The rice itself came from the Empire's fertile inland deltas, irrigated fields glistening under the sun, where farmers coax harvest after harvest from muddy banks. The combination of gold and grain was what made these feasts possible. Well, to import spices and luxuries, and rice to provide the bulk that made bowls rise like miniature mountains. You pause, noticing how each caravan arrives with its own little entourage. Guards with spears tipped in iron, cooks carrying bundles of dried fish, musicians with dusty instruments slung casually across their backs. It's like a traveling festival that simply merges into the larger celebration once it reaches the capital. A wiry boy darts between the animals, trying to grab a piece of dried meat dangling from a pack. He's caught, of course, and scolded with a firm but amused slap. Historians still argue whether every caravan that arrived for such banquets was part of an imperial tax system or whether many were voluntary gifts. Tributes meant to earn favor at court. Either way, the effect was the same. The palace courtyards transformed into treasure troves of food and wealth, blending necessity with spectacle. You can't help but imagine logistics. How many cooks does it take to wash, cut, and season an entire herd's worth of goats? How many backaches were earned lugging sacks of rice heavier than a modern refrigerator? One caravan leader, his robe stitched with red embroidery, proudly displays a massive bar of salt cut from the mines of Tagaza. To your surprise, the nobles murmur appreciation not for its size, but for its purity. In a land where sweat rolls constantly, salt is more valuable to daily survival than gold. You watch as small pieces are chipped off, destined to be ground into sauces, sprinkled over meat, or even slipped into drinks. A drummer begins a low rhythm as the unloading continues, as if to turn this mundane task of distribution into a performance. The beat is slow, steady, hypnotic, almost like the rhythm of a modern warehouse's conveyor belt if that conveyor belt had soul. You catch yourself nodding along, before realizing you're standing between two camels who are eyeing you with suspicion. You shuffle away, reminding yourself that a camel's kick is not the bedtime story you came for. The sun is gone now, and the courtyard glows under rows of lanterns. The gold is stacked neatly, rice piled high, salt bars gleaming. This is wealth you can see and smell, wealth that doesn't just sit in treasuries but becomes a living, steaming meal for hundreds. As you look around, you realize you're not the only outsider astonished by the spectacle. There are traders from Cairo whispering in Arabic, envoys from desert tribes clutching their cloaks tighter, and perhaps even a lost European, wide-eyed and mutter about how none of this will be believed when he writes it down. And so you drift further into the scene, following the scent of rice beginning to boil, listening to the steady hum of drums and conversation, aware that you've stepped into the very heart of an empire where gold is common, rice is plentiful, and the night's banquet promises to turn both into unforgettable abundance. You step through an arched gateway into the palace courtyard themselves, where the air feels heavier, perfumed with incense and thick with expectation. The walls rise high, coated in pale clay that glows like ivory under the torchlight, while woven awnings stretch above to catch the drifting smoke and the occasional spark. Courtiers glide past in robes of indigo and white, their jewelry catching every flicker of flame, as if they're stars walking the earth. You ease into the crowd, careful not to step on the hem of anyone's robe. You have a feeling the punishment for that would be less than relaxing. The courtyards are alive with movement. Rows of attendants sweep the ground with palm fronds to clear sand away from the feasting space. Wooden benches, surprisingly smooth for a time without modern sanding tools, are being positioned in semicircles. You watch men hoist enormous shade awnings made of woven cloth, dyed in patterns that look like the rippling surface of the Niger River. When the breeze catches, those patterns shift and shimmer like water itself. The scene is both grand and practical. Banquets in Mali were not just about indulgence. They were about showing order, wealth, and the ability to choreograph chaos into ceremony. At the center sits a raised platform, draped with bright fabrics and cushions. It's the throne area, though tonight it looks less like a seat of power, and more like a stage for a culinary opera. You imagine the king reclining there, surveying not only the bowls of rice, but the order of his empire. Historical accounts suggest these banquets doubled as political theater, where the display of food proved not only prosperity but control. Historians still argue whether every guest attended freely or whether some courtiers were strongly encouraged to show up and demonstrate loyalty with their presence. Either way, once you're seated, leaving before the rice arrives is not really an option. Nearby, the palace guards stand tall, their spears upright, their gaze is sharp but not unfriendly. Their presence is a reminder that even in this ocean of food, power flows in multiple directions. You catch one guard stifling a yawn, proof that even warriors can't resist the hypnotic rhythm of waiting for dinner. The courtiers themselves seem to float through the space. One group debates loudly and sonic about which spices are best for rice, peppercorns or cloves, while another compares the quality of camel loads that just arrived from the desert. A woman with bangles from wrist to elbow laughs as she sprinkles perfume on her hands, preparing for the ritual of washing before eating. And then there are the griots, those storytellers with voices like velvet, who begin warming up by reciting the genealogy of the rulers, their words bouncing off the clay walls like echoes from another time. At one corner of the courtyard, children of lesser nobles chase each other around the columns, their shrieks quickly hushed by a stern nursemaid. You grin at the sight. It seems no banquet, whether medieval or modern, can fully silence restless kids. A quick callback strikes you. Remember that merchant joking about children getting lost circling a rice bowl? Watching this chaotic game of tag, you're half convinced he wasn't joking after all. The sun is completely gone now, and with night settling in, the torches are joined by clay lamps balanced on ledges. Shadows dance across the walls, giving the impression that the courtyard itself is alive, breathing, shifting, waiting. Servants bustle with clay jars filled with water, splashing on the ground to settle the dust. The smell of damp earth rises, mixing with the perfume, the spice, and the unmistakable aroma of rice now bubbling somewhere just out of sight. As you find your place among the gathering crowd, you realize how communal the arrangement is. No individual plate, no private serving, just vast bowls that everyone will dip into with clean hands. This isn't a feast where one person sits apart with a fancy dish. This is about unity, about showing that the empire's abundance touches all who sit in the glow of the palace torches. Somewhere, a servant strikes a gong, a hollow, metallic boom that silences a chatter for a heartbeat. Then, as the sound fades, conversations resume in softer tones, anticipation rising like steam. You lean back, taking in the spectacle of courtiers, guards, musicians, servants, and the empty bowls waiting to be filled. The palace courtyard is no longer just a space. It is transformed into a stage where rice, gold, and power will perform side by side. And you, fortunate or perhaps unlucky enough to be here, are seated in the audience, waiting for the first act to begin. The murmurs swell as servants begin to file in, each carrying trays that steam in the cool night air. You lean forward, craning your neck like everyone else. And finally you see them, mountains of rice rising from bowls so large they look like overturned drums. The bowls gleam in firelight, their rims decorated with simple geometric carvings. They're not meant to dazzle. They're meant to hold absurd quantities of food. And they do, almost comically so. You wonder if the rice inside was measured by weight, or if someone just kept pouring until the bowl threatened to collapse. You take in the sight. Rice piled high, steaming clouds drifting upward, curling into the sky like whispers. Each grain looks perfectly fluffed, glistening as though polished individually. The sheer size is laughable. One mound towers higher than your shoulder. A nervous thought slips in. How many people would it take to finish one of these? The answer, judging from the hungry faces around you, is an entire empire. Historians still argue whether these descriptions of rice mountains came from exaggeration in travelers' tales, or whether they were genuine feats of culinary engineering. Ibn Battuta wrote a bowl so large it could feed 100 men, and those skeptics say he had a flair for embellishment. The abundance of Mali's river valleys makes the claim less far-fetched. After all, when you command fertile deltas that flood predictably and generously, you can afford to be a little dramatic with your serving sizes. A servant brushes past, struggling to balance a bowl nearly as wide as a wagon wheel. His arms shake, but he manages to set it down with a thud that rattles the wooden benches. Rice spills slightly over the rim, scattering like pale pearls across the floor, and instantly children scramble forward to snatch the grains, giggling as if they've caught treasure. You realize this isn't wasteful. Every grain matters, even in a land of abundance. The aroma envelopes you, nutty, earthy rice scented with cinnamon and pepper. Somewhere in the mixture you detect a sweeter note. Perhaps dates or figs that traders carried in from the desert. You imagine dipping your hand in, the warmth filling your palm, the grains soft yet firm. And then you imagine the burn if you were impatient, because these bowls have come straight from enormous cauldrons stirred with paddles longer than a man's arm. Not exactly microwave safe. Around you, courtiers murmur appreciatively, though some make jokes in low tones. One man leans toward his neighbor and quips, "If the bowl were any bigger, we need camels to climb it." The neighbor chuckles politely. Palace humor, not too daring, but enough to break the tension. You can't help but smile, too. Food has always been a universal icebreaker, whether in medieval Africa or your own kitchen. The servants continue to arrange the bowls in precise order. Largest at the center, smaller ones radiating outward like ripples in a pond. It's as if the banquet itself is a diagram of Mali's power, abundance at the heart, shared outward in careful proportion. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Food here is politics, art, and sustenance rolled into one steaming heap. From the corner, a griot's voice rises, chanting the genealogy of kings while the rice is arranged. His words are rhythmic, almost hypnotic, names of ancestors, victories, journeys. You find yourself lulled, the cadence of history blending with the scent of rice, until the two seem inseparable. The message is clear. These bowls are not just food, they are the living embodiment of heritage. To eat is to participate in the empire story. A stray cat darts between legs, bold enough to snatch a fallen chunk of meat from a smaller bowl. The crowd erupts in laughter, and one servant shoos it gently away, muttering what you assume is a curse but sounds suspiciously affectionate. You tuck that moment away, another reminder that even in grand courts, life sneaks in little comic interruptions. By now the courtyard is full of steam and anticipation. You shift on the bench, realizing the night has only begun. These rice mountains are not the finale. They're just the base, waiting for layers of meat, fish, and sauces to crown them. You glance toward the palace entrance, where more servants are lining up, and you understand this spectacle has only just begun to climb. The bowls of rice, impressive on their own, are soon joined by the rich aromas of meat and fish drifting across the courtyard. You hear the scrape of iron pots being set down. The hiss of oil as more food is prepared just beyond the walls. Your nose tingles with the mingled scents. The earthy weight of goat stew, the savory tang of smoked fish, and the faint sweetness of onions caramelize slowly over open flames. You might think of a backyard barbecue, except magnified until the fire could roast a cow whole, which, to be fair, is not far from what's happening. Servants approach with platters nearly buckling under their load. One carries an entire roasted goat, the skin crisp, the meat shining with glaze. Another staggers with a tray of catfish pulled straight from the Niger River. Each fish so large it looks capable of swallowing a smaller one whole. Historians note that fish was a staple of Malian diets, with the empire's waterways providing endless supplies. But the quirky part is that dried fish was sometimes crumbled into sauces not just for flavor, but as a form of protein dust, sprinkled almost like Parmesan cheese. You picture someone today shaking fish flakes onto their pizza, and feel oddly connected across centuries. The platters are lowered beside the rice, and the transformation begins. Meat is heaped on top of the steaming mounds, juices dripping down the sides, soaking into the grains. The effect is mouth-watering. Even the courtiers, trained to maintain composure, lean forward slightly. A nobleman whispers, "The goat stew tonight smells of cloves, imported cloves," and his tone makes it clear this is not a trivial detail. In a world where spices travel thousands of miles strapped to camels, the mere presence of cloves at your dinner is a flex. You watch a cook ladle sauce from a cauldron, the liquid dark and thick, flecked with peppers and herbs. It flows over the rice like lava, seeping into every crevice. The cook hums while he works, perhaps the same tune his grandmother used when stirring simpler family stews. Food is not only power here, it's memory, continuity, a whisper home tucked inside an empire's grand display. Historians still argue whether the fish and meat at these banquets were primarily drawn from tribute, taxes paid by provinces, or they came from the king's own herds and fisheries. Either way, the abundance is staggering. Herds of cattle, goats, and sheep dotted the savannas, while fishing villages along the river cast nets so wide they seem to drag up half the Niger. You imagine the logistical chaos. Shouting herders, slippery fish flopping on boats, cooks waving frantically for more firewood. It's both comedy and miracle that it all comes together into something this refined. As the bowls are crowned with meat and sauce, a hush settles. This is a moment when eyes widen, stomachs growl, and tongues are nearly bitten to keep from drooling. A servant carrying roasted chickens, small, golden, fragrant with ginger, stumbles slightly, and the entire crowd gasps as if witnessing a tragedy. He recovers, thankfully, and laughter ripples out. One noble mutters, "The chicken nearly joined us before blessing," and earns a round of amused nods. The sounds shift now from chatter to anticipation. You hear spoons clinking faintly as servers stir to keep rice from clumping. Drummers in the corner strike a slower beat, mirroring the rhythm of hearts sinking to the sight of food. You can't help but chuckle. It's like a medieval ASMR moment, every sound oddly soothing if you let yourself drift with it. You glance at the courtiers again. Their faces reflect the seriousness of the occasion. Because here, food is more than indulgence. It's political theater. To feed hundreds, to pile rice so high it resembles small hills, to crown it with goat, fish, and chicken, that is a statement. Mali is abundant. Mali is strong. Mali's rulers command the earth's harvest and the river's gifts. You realize you're not just attending dinner. You're sitting inside a performance where every grain of rice is a line in the empire's script. And as you inhale deeply, savoring the mingled scents of rice, meat, and river fish, you know the act is far from over. Somewhere behind you, more trays are on their way. Tonight, the bowls won't just be enormous. They'll be endless. The air begins to vibrate with sound. Soft at first, then steady, as the Songhai musicians take their places near the edge of the courtyard. You feel the first plucked notes of the kora ripple like threads through the night, each string ringing clear as water dripping from stone. A balafon joins in, its wooden keys struck with a rhythm that reminds you of rain tapping gently on a rooftop. And then the drums, deep resonant, like distant thunder rolling toward the feast. You notice how carefully the music is arranged. These are not random entertainers pulled from the street. They are professionals, guardians of rhythm, descended from families who played for courts across generations. Their role is as essential to the banquet as the rice itself. After all, food fills the belly, but music fills the space in between bites, smoothing the silence into something communal, something celebratory. The melodies coil around you, weaving through conversations, softening the voices of courtiers and merchants. One noblewoman leans closer to her companion, whispering that the kora player tonight is said to be the grandson of a master who once performed for Munsam Musa himself. Historians note that these instruments were more than entertainment. They carried oral history, reminding everyone of victories, trade routes, and alliances. The quirky part? Some of these songs doubled as subtle commentary on politics, almost like medieval musical editorials. Imagine gossip delivered not by Twitter, but by harp. You watch the musicians tune mid-performance, a casual flex that makes the courtiers smile. The drummer tightens his skin with a twist of rope. Then it's a rolling pattern that vibrates in your chest. You can't help but grin. Somewhere in your modern brain, you think, this is the original surround sound. Historians still argue whether the musicians were considered equal to griots or placed lower in status. Some sources suggest they were deeply respected, while others hint they were seen as background players rather than history keepers. But as you listen, it's impossible not to feel the power of their presence. The food smells rich, yes, but the music turns a feast into something beyond a meal. It becomes an atmosphere, a trance. A cheeky moment arrives when two drummers lock eyes and begin a playful duel, their rhythms quickening like a verbal sparring match. One throws in a flourish so fast it makes the crowd gasp. The other responds with a thunderous roll that rattles your bones. A ripple of laughter spreads. You sense the competition isn't hostile. It's tradition, a way of keeping energy alive while rice cools enough to eat. Meanwhile, the kora player closes his eyes, plucking slower, deeper tones that seem to slow time itself. The chatter softens, and even the children settle, lulled by the lullaby woven through the noise. You lean back against your bench, imagining what it must feel like to spend your life traveling from feast to feast, carrying history in your fingertips. No Spotify, no sheet music, just memory and practice. Songs passed down like heirlooms. The night sky above you is clear now, stars sharp against velvet darkness. The music rises toward them, as though reminding heaven itself that Mali feasts tonight. And in the courtyard, amid the clink of serving spoons and the rustle of robes, you understand that sound is as filling as food. You don't just watch the banquet. You hear it, feel it, carry in the hollow of your chest where the drums echo and the harp's notes linger long after they fade. You let the music wash over you, but your eyes are drawn toward the women of court, who glide in with trays of sauces balanced as effortlessly as if they were carrying nothing at all. Their arms are jingling with bangles, their ankles chiming with small bells, each movement both graceful and practical. They're not only attendants, they're culinary artists in their own right, trusted to bring the feast from ordinary to legendary. The trays they carry shimmer with color, deep red sauces spiced with peppers, golden gravies thickened with groundnuts, and green stews flecked with herbs that give off a sharp, fresh aroma. Each one is destined to be poured over the towering rice bowls, transforming them from simple mounds into rivers of flavor. You watch as a woman tilts her ladle, letting sauce cascade like molten amber, soaking into the grains below. Historians note that Malian cuisine often featured peanut-based sauces, centuries before peanuts would make their way into modern West African dishes we recognize today. The quirky tidbit? Some recipes even call for mixing in dried hibiscus or crushed baobab leaves, giving the sauce a tangy kick. Imagine ordering rice today and being told, "Would you like that with a hint of baobab?" The women laugh among themselves as they work, occasionally teasing the servants who scurry past. One woman dips her finger into a sauce, tastes it, and smirks at a cook across the courtyard as if to say, "Too much pepper, but I'll let it slide." Even in royal banquets, kitchen banter lives strong. You notice how carefully they pace themselves. The bowls are enormous, and the sauces need to be spread evenly so that no guest feels slighted. It's less cooking now and more choreography, an elegant ballet where each movement has consequence. A splash too heavy here, and the rice at the bottom becomes soggy. Too light there, and nobles might mutter that they were served plain. In a court where food is power, even the ladle's path holds political weight. Historians still argue whether the women of the court who prepared sauces held formal positions or were more informal attendants drawn from noble families. Some suggest they were part of a trained guild, passing recipes and skills down through generations. Others argue they were chosen more for proximity to the court than for expertise. Yet, watching their poise tonight, it's hard to imagine anyone but seasoned experts holding such responsibility. You catch a moment of humor as one noble woman insists on stirring her own sauce before it's served, declaring loudly that her family has a secret method. The surrounding courtiers chuckle politely, though you suspect they've heard this boast before. Food pride, it seems, transcends time. The scent is overwhelming now. Goat stew laced with cloves, fish swimming in tomato-rich broth, rice saturated with spicy peanut gravy. You imagine your fingers dipping into the bowl, warm grains clinging, sauces coating your skin, the flavors so layered you'd need 3 bites just to name them all. Around you, bellies rumble audibly, and you realize patience is part of performance. One of the women adjusts her headscarf, then turns to whisper something to a griot passing by. He nods, makes a note in his chant, and suddenly the story of the feast itself is woven into song. How sauces flowed like rivers, how rice rose like mountains, how women of the court balance abundance with grace. The audience chuckles, amused at seeing their dinner immortalized in verse. And in that moment, you understand, the women are not only cooks, nor simply attendants. They are part of the storytelling, too, their work folded into the empire's memory, ladle by ladle, sauce by sauce, until the banquet itself becomes history served hot. As the sauces drip golden and red into the steaming bowls, you find your thoughts drifting to the hands that made all of this possible. Not the jeweled attendants, not the griots, not even the bustling servants rushing around you, but the farmers far beyond these palace walls. You picture them ankle-deep in muddy water, bent under the sun, coaxing rice shoots to stand tall in fields fed by the inland delta of a Niger. Without their labor, there would be no mountains of rice, no cascades of sauce, no royal performance tonight. You imagine walking alongside them, your feet sinking into the wet soil as you carry a woven basket strapped to your back. The sun beats down relentlessly, and the air hums with insects. Yet the farmers move with a rhythm born of necessity, planting and harvesting in cycles as predictable as the river's flood. It's less glamorous than the courtyard spectacle, but more essential. Historians note that Mali's wealth was rooted not only in gold, but in its ability to feed its people, thanks to fertile riverbanks. The quirky detail? Some farmers sang planting songs timed to the rhythm of splashing water, which kept the group in sync, an early version of work playlists, except without earbuds. You see their callous hands as they cut stalks, thresh grain, and winnow rice in wide, shallow baskets. Each grain that now steams in the courtyard was once flicked into the air, the wind separating husk from food. It's a process as old as civilization itself, and yet tonight is invisible, erased by the grandeur of the feast. You feel a tug of sympathy. After all, no one applauds a farmer when the rice arrives, though every noble applauds a king. Historians still argue whether farmers in the Mali Empire worked under a strict taxation system, handing over a portion of their crop, or whether many fields were held communally, their yields divided among families and rulers alike. Whatever the truth, the result is here before you, steaming in bowls larger than a child's bed. The rice is the unseen thread binding the empire, humble grains carrying the weight of power. One servant mutters as he sets down another platter, "If only the farmers could see their rice dressed like this." You catch his wry smile and know he's imagining the muddy fields, the bent backs, the sweat dripping into earth. The contrast is striking. Fields where survival hangs by the strength of your arms, and courtyards where rice becomes theater. You let your gaze wander back to the bowls, remembering that merchant's joke about children getting lost circling them. You realize he wasn't entirely wrong. The rice is not just food. It's geography, shaped by thousands of hands across landscapes most of these courtiers have never walked. To eat a single handful tonight is to eat the work of villages scattered across river valleys, the patience of families who rise before dawn, the persistence of generations who master flood rhythms long before charts and calendars. A soft breeze drifts across the courtyard, carrying the scent of wet soil. For a fleeting moment, you feel as though the farmers are here, their presence folded into the banquet, silent but undeniable. The nobles may claim credit, the griots may sing, but every mouthful begins far away, in a muddy field where someone once knelt in the sun and pressed a fragile shoot into earth. And as another ladle of sauce spills over the rice, you whisper inwardly a quiet thanks. Not to the king, not to the musicians, but to the invisible farmers whose toil underpins the abundance. Without them, this night would be nothing but empty bowls and hungry eyes. Your eyes shift from the steaming rice to the smaller tables being set at the edges of the courtyard, where imported luxuries gleam faintly in the torchlight. Traders have laid out bolts of silk so smooth they shimmer like water, beads of Venetian glass that sparkle like tiny frozen drops of rain, and bundles of spices tied with twine. The locals treat them casually, but you can't help staring. These are the goods that travel deserts, mountains, and seas, only end up flavoring rice in a courtyard thousands of miles from where they began. A servant unwraps a pouch of cloves, the scent sharp and warm, strong enough to make your nose twitch. Another tips a jar of saffron threads into a bowl, their golden strands glowing as though they carry sunlight trapped inside. You realize each pinch of spice represents weeks of travel, camels trudging across endless sand, sailors braving storms on the Mediterranean, merchants haggling in chaotic markets. Historians note that Mali's banquets were as much a showcase of trade connections as of food. To serve rice seasoned with faraway saffron was to declare, "The world comes to us." And here's the quirky part. Some accounts mention glass beads being thrown into banquets not as jewelry, but as decorative scatter on tables, a way to catch light. You imagine someone today sprinkling diamonds on a picnic blanket just to make sandwiches look fancy. It's absurd, and yet somehow perfectly on brand for a court so rich. The courtiers lean in to inspect these imported goods, whispering to one another about origins. One claims the silks are from Cairo, another insists they come all the way from China. Historians still argue whether direct connections between Mali and Asia existed, or whether goods trickled through middlemen. Either way, what lands here in bowls and on tables is proof of an empire with veins stretched across continents. A noble gestures proudly toward the spices and declares, "See, even the desert bends to us." His companion smirks and replies, "The desert bends only if the camels survive." The dry humor earns a ripple of laughter, because everyone here knows the cost of moving luxuries is measured not just in coins, but in lives, in aching feet, in calloused hands. You step closer. The fragrance is overwhelming. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, all layered over the earthy smell of rice and goat. It's like standing inside a spice bazaar and a kitchen at once. One cook grinds peppercorns with stone mortar, the rhythmic crunch almost hypnotic, like an ancient metronome keeping the feast in time. And yet, amid all this luxury, you notice something simple, a cluster of onions, peppers, and garlic from local fields. They sit alongside the exotic imports, humble but equally essential. You smile, realizing that even when empires boast of silks and spices, the real backbone of flavor often comes from homegrown basics. The griot near you lifts his voice, weaving these goods into the night story. Rice of the river, goat of the savannah, fish of the Niger, spice of the far horizon. His chant rises with the scent of cloves, reminding you that every bite tonight is also geography, a map in edible form. You glance at your own hands, imagining dipping them into rice flavored with pepper that once grew in forests you've never seen. The world feels suddenly smaller, as though this courtyard is a meeting point of continents. And when the nobles finally taste their meal, they'll be swallowing not only Mali's abundance, but also a hint of India, a whisper of Arabia, a touch of the Mediterranean. World history folded into one enormous bowl. The clamor of voices softens as servants carry in large basins filled with warm, scented water. You realize the next act in this banquet's choreography isn't about eating yet. It's about etiquette. Guests rise from benches, move toward the basins, and begin the ritual of washing hands. The water glistens in the firelight, steam rising gently as if the bowls themselves are sighing. You step forward, following the rhythm of the crowd. A servant pours water over your palms from a clay jug, the stream warm and fragrant with crushed herbs. The sensation is oddly calming, almost like a prelude to sleep. You rub your hands together, the dirt and dust of the day running away in rivulets. For a moment, you're not an outsider. You're part of the flow, cleansed alongside merchants, courtiers, and even minor nobles. Historians note that hand-washing before communal meals was a deeply ingrained custom in West Africa, centuries before forks and spoons became widespread in Europe. The quirky part? Some travelers wrote that the water was sometimes perfumed with flower petals or even lightly salted, believed to help with cleanliness and, perhaps, to impress the senses before eating. You can almost picture a courtier of old sniffing his palms after washing, then nodding solemnly as if grating the aroma. Once cleansed, guests return to their places. The bowls of rice and meat wait like sleeping giants, their steam curling lazily in the cool night air. There are no utensils here. Hands, clean hands, are the tools of the feast. Each guest pinches a portion of rice, rolling it deftly into a small ball before popping it into their mouth. You watch nobles do this with practiced ease, their fingers precise, elegant, as though every bite were a gesture of dignity. One man beside you, clearly new to the tradition, struggles to keep his rice ball from crumbling. A child snickers, earning a sharp glare from his mother. You try it yourself and nearly drop the rice back into the bowl, catching it at the last second like a clumsy juggler. The noble woman across from you hides a smile behind her veil. Historians still argue about the precise etiquette. Did guests eat only from the section of rice directly in front of them, or was it acceptable to reach across for a favor by the goat or fish? Some accounts suggest strict rules. Others describe a more casual approach. What's clear is that these rules reflected respect. Eating neatly, never hogging, never letting food drip onto the floor. In short, don't be that guest. The griot's chant softens, replaced by the hum of satisfaction, as rice finally reaches mouths. A quiet unity descends. People from different backgrounds, traders, soldiers, scribes, sit shoulder to shoulder, dipping into the same bowl, sharing the same grains. You sense how deliberate this is. The banquet is not only theater, it's glue. Eating from one dish erases, for a moment, the gaps of class and distance. And just as you're settling into the rhythm, one of the musicians strikes a bright, playful note. It earns chuckles from the crowd, almost as if the kora itself has winked. Even the food seems to taste lighter with music in the background. A noble leans over to another and jokes. The rice obeys better when the harp plays. It's silly, but everyone laughs anyway. The bowls are never still. Hands dip in. Sauces drip down. Fish bones are neatly set aside. Yet nothing feels rushed. The feast flows like a tide, slow, steady, unhurried, guided by etiquette as much as appetite. And as you lick the last bit of sauce from your fingers, you realize you're not just eating. You're participating in centuries of tradition, where hand-washing, pinching rice, and sharing bowls speak louder than any speech. The rhythm of the meal is well underway now. Yet your eyes wander to the edges of the courtyard where servants bustle like a tide that never rests. They dart in and out with clay jars balanced on shoulders, wooden ladles tucked into belts, and cloth towels slung over arms. You marvel at their coordination. It's like watching a dance troupe that never rehearsed, yet somehow every step lands in time. One servant bends under the weight of a jar. So large you wonder if he's secretly carrying a small person inside. He staggers, then rights himself, muttering something under his breath that sounds suspiciously like a prayer and a curse rolled together. Another hustles past with trays of millet beer sloshing dangerously close to the rim. You half expect the liquid to spill, but she glides with practiced calm, placing the cups down with barely a ripple. Historians note that servants at royal banquets were often drawn from the enslaved populations of the empire, though others were free retainers serving out of obligation or ambition. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts describe them moving so quickly that dust rose constantly from the floor, and nobles joked the rice was being seasoned by palace sand. You glance down at your own bowl, half concerned, half amused, and realize the comment might not be far off. You catch snippets of their chatter, short, efficient exchanges. More sauce to the west table. Bring another jar of beer. The goat stew is cooling, hurry. They don't have time for gossip. The feast is their battlefield, and rice is their weapon. The drummer's rhythm seems to sync with their footsteps, turning chaos into something oddly soothing. Historians still argue whether these servants were given recognition after feasts or remained invisible. Some chronicles mention reward to cloth or food. Others suggest they were forgotten once the bowls emptied. But watching them tonight, you know their work is as vital as the gold that funds a meal. Without them, nobles would sit hungry, and the empire performance would collapse in embarrassment. You smile when one servant pauses just long enough to flick a grain of rice at another, a mischievous grin flashing before he darts away. The other shakes his head but can't hide a smirk. Even here, in the thick of duty, humor survives. And you can't help but think, some things never change. Anyone who's worked in a restaurant kitchen today would recognize that same weary camaraderie. A group of servants gathers near a corner, balancing trays piled with dried fruit and honey cakes. Their faces are tense. These trays will be presented later in the evening, and the pressure not to stumble is immense. You imagine the silent pep talks they give themselves. Don't trip, for the love of rice, don't trip. The clink of jars fills the courtyard as more beer is poured, the liquid earthy and slightly sour, brewed from millet in bubbling gourds. You catch the scent as a cup is passed near you, yeasty, warm, comforting. It's not wine, not ale, but something in between, a taste of the land itself. Everywhere, servants weave like threads in a tapestry, holding the feast together. They are not the stars of the show, but without them, there would be no show at all. And as you watch their endless circuit, pouring, carrying, fetching, you realize their footsteps are the heartbeat of the banquet, steady, unseen, essential. Amid the swirl of music, laughter, and the clatter of serving jars, you notice a quieter corner of the courtyard where men sit hunched over small desks. The flicker of lamplight reveals reed pen scratching across parchment, and suddenly you realize these are the scribes, recording everything. While nobles feast and musicians play, these figures bend silently, capturing the night in strokes of ink that will outlive the rice steaming only a few feet away. Their presence feels almost out of place. In a courtyard bursting with sound and smell, the scribes are wrapped in concentration, lips moving faintly as they murmur words before setting them down. Historians note that literacy in the Mali Empire was highly prized, especially in cities like Timbuktu, where scholars gather to debate law, theology, and trade. The quirky detail? Some scribes reportedly measured their ink so carefully they ration drops like cooks ration spices. You imagine one sighing, "That sentence cost me 3 cloves worth of ink." You peer closer and glimpse what they're writing. Lists of dishes, quantities of rice, the number of guests. One even sketches rough diagrams of bowls, labeling which sauces adorn which mounds. This isn't just record keeping, it's legacy. To write down the banquet is to make it eternal, to declare, "We had enough rice to feed hundreds, and we will be remembered for it." One scribe pauses, rubs his wrist, and looks up at the towering bowls. You catch his faint smile, as though even he can't believe what he's expected to describe. A colleague leans over, whispers something, and the two chuckle softly before resuming. Perhaps they're joking about how historians centuries later will argue whether these rice bowls were exaggerated. And indeed, historians still debate whether travelers like Ibn Battuta exaggerated for drama, or whether scribes themselves embellished to impress future generations. The air near the scribes smells different, less of goat stew and more of ink, parchment, and oil lamps. The soft scratching of pen tips forms a counter-rhythm to the drummer's beat, quieter but no less steady. You realize this, too, is music. The sound of history being etched into permanence while the feast unfolds in fleeting moments. Occasionally, a noble wanders by to check what's being written, peering over the scribe's shoulder like a curious editor. One even corrects a detail with a firm tap on the page, insisting a particular sauce contain imported saffron, not local onion. The scribe sighs but adjusts the line, proof that politics seeps into ink as easily as into rice. And then there's a flash of humor. A scribe dips his pen, sneezes from the pepper drifting in the air, and leaves a blot the size of a coin on his page. He stares at it, horrified, then quickly turns the blot into a decorative flourish. From your angle, it looks like a rice bowl doodle. You grin. Creativity born from sneeze. The griot passes by, glances at the scribes, and sings a line about the men who trap words like fish in a net. The scribes smirk, and use being included in poetry, but their hands never stop moving. And you realize, while the musicians make the night beautiful, the scribes make it remembered. Without them, the rice would vanish with dawn. With them, it lingers long after bowls are emptied and crumbs are swept away. As you lean back, watching lamplight flicker across ink-stained fingers, you feel the weight of continuity. These scribes don't just describe banquets. They preserve a vision of Mali where rice rises like mountains, sauces flow like rivers, and an empire proves itself through abundance. Tonight, history is being eaten, sung, and, thanks to the scribes, quietly written into eternity. The scribes' pens scratch on, but your gaze is pulled toward a new commotion at the palace gates. A line of camels lumbers in, their padded feet barely making a sound on the packed earth. Each beast sways with the slow rhythm of the desert, and dangling from their saddles are rectangular blocks that glimmer faintly under torchlight. At first you think it's stone, but no, it's salt, the pale treasure at the Gaza. The caravan drivers look weary, their robes powdered white from weeks of salt dust. You imagine them trudging across dunes that stretch endless, guided only by stars and stubbornness. Historians note that salt was as valuable as gold in Mali, sometimes even traded weight for weight. The quirky detail? Some merchants chewed small chunks of raw salt during journeys to stave off heat exhaustion, crunching it like candy in the desert sun. You wince at the thought, but in this climate, survival beats flavor. The camels kneel, groaning, and porters heave the heavy blocks down. With practice skill, workers chip smaller pieces off, the shards falling like pale crystals into baskets. Soon, the salt is carried into the courtyard, destined for stew pots and rice bowls. You hear nobles murmur approvingly. It isn't the gold that impresses them. It's the salt. Gold shines, yes, but salt keeps you alive when sweat pours daily and food demands flavor. One porter wipes his brow, leaving streaks of white across his face. He catches your amused glance and shrugs, muttering something that sounds like cheaper than face paint. You chuckle, realizing even exhaustion doesn't dim humor. Historians still argue about the control of salt routes. Did the empire directly manage them, or did semi-independent traders dominate? What's certain is that without caravans like this, no feast could truly begin. Meat and rice might fill the belly, but without salt, everything tastes flat. Tonight, though, no one will complain about blandness. The air already tingles with the promise of seasoning. A servant sprinkles freshly ground salt crystals into a pot of goat stew. The hiss as crystals hit the bubbling surface sounds almost like applause. You inhale and catch the sharp mineral edge blending with cloves, onions, and peppers. The stew smells deeper now, richer, as though the desert itself has joined the feast. The camels are led away, their job done. Though one pauses by the rice bowls longingly, you imagine it thinking, all this walking and not even a bite? You can't help but grin. Even the animals seem aware they've carried the banquet on their backs. The Grout raises his voice, weaving the salt into song. Gold builds mosques, rice feeds villages, but salt makes life endure. The line rings true, its rhythm steady as the heartbeat of the caravan. The crowd nods in agreement, some tapping fingers to the beat, others already dipping rice into salted stew. And you, sitting amid the shimmer of crystals and the steam of rice, realize that this banquet is not just a celebration of food. It's a map of the empire's arteries. Rivers bringing fish, fields growing rice, caravans carrying salt. Tonight, the Mali Empire does not simply display wealth. It consumes geography itself, one seasoned bite at a time. The salt still lingers on your tongue when another sound drifts into courtyard, the distant splash of oars. You tilt your head and catch the scent of river water carried on the breeze. Not far from here, along the banks of the Niger, fishing villages have been working since dawn to deliver their part of the feast. You picture the scene. Narrow canoes carved from single tree trunks, nets cast wide into the current, men hauling against the pull of river giants. Fish are everywhere in Mali's cuisine, and tonight they take center stage beside the rice. You watch as servants carry an enormous catfish, their scales glistening under torchlight, mouths gaping as though still gasping from a river. Some are so large you wonder if they could have dragged a canoe sideways. Historians note that fishermen of the Niger often smoked or dried fish for preservation, ensuring protein year-round. The quirky tidbit? Travelers wrote that certain villages trained cormorants to help chase fish into nets, though whether this was fact or colorful exaggeration remains debated. Either way, it makes you glance nervously at the sky, half expecting a bird to swoop in for leftovers. The fish are lowered into steaming pots or laid across grills, sizzling as flames lick their sides. The aromas shift from earthy rice and goat to sharp, savory river scent. Fat drips onto coals, releasing smoke that curls upward like incense. The courtiers murmur appreciatively. Fresh fish is not just a meal, it's proof of the empire's command over both land and water. One cook flips a massive tilapia with a paddle longer than your arm, chuckling when it nearly slips. Another carefully sprinkles salt crystals ground from the Gaza blocks, sealing flavor into flesh. The hiss is sharp, satisfying, like the river itself applauding. A few children clap in imitation, their laughter carrying across the courtyard. Historians still argue whether the bulk of fish for royal banquets came directly as tribute from river villages or through trade markets bustling with fishermen and middlemen. What is clear is that the Niger was a lifeline, its waters feeding not just bellies but the empire's reputation. A banquet without fish would have been unthinkable, like staging a play without its chorus. As platters arrive, the rice bowls transform again. Catfish steaks crown the mounds, sauce poured generously until grains glisten dark with river flavor. Guests dip fingers in rolling rice with flakes of fish, their satisfied murmurs harmonizing with the drummer's beat. The grout even changes the song, weaving in lines about rivers wide as kingdoms, fish fat as treasure. You lean back, savoring the scene. The river may be a few streets away, but here, with each bite of fish, it flows straight through the courtyard. And as another canoe docks unseen in the night, its nets heavy with tomorrow's catch. You understand. These banquets aren't just feasts. They're living echoes of the land and water, woven together in rice, sauce, and fish that carry the empire's heartbeat to every guest. The bowls are no longer just rice. They become layered monuments of empire. Rice at the base, sauce is shimmering, goat and fish piled high. But the true architects of this abundance are the cooks, those tireless figures bent over cauldrons so large they look like inverted shields. You catch sight of them now in the background, half hidden by smoke, their arms moving in wide arcs as they stir with paddles taller than themselves. The scale is absurd. One man braces a paddle against his shoulder just to move the stew, his face red with effort. Another shouts for more firewood, and sparks shoot upward as a boy tosses in logs. The cauldron bubbles ominously, and you half expect it to belch like a volcano. Historians note that preparing for these banquets could take entire days, with kitchens operating like military camps. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts describe cooks tying cloth around their faces to keep smoke out of their lungs, an early low-tech version of a chef's mask. You imagine one grumbling, if only someone would invent a chimney. The rhythm of the kitchen is almost hypnotic. Chop, stir, ladle, taste. A woman sprinkles crushed nuts into a sauce, the rich smell of peanuts wafting through the courtyard. A man fans flames with a woven mat, sweat dripping into the dust. The sounds blend at the drummers, thud of pestles and mortars, hiss of meat hitting oil, the splash of water poured into boiling pots. It's noisy, chaotic, yet weirdly soothing, like a lullaby disguised as kitchen work. Historians still argue whether royal cooks were enslaved specialists trained from youth or free guild members whose skills brought them prestige. Either way, their expertise shaped every feast. Watching them, you sense pride in their movements, how carefully they adjust seasoning, how confidently they balance flavors. They aren't just feeding mouths, they're sculpting history in broth and spice. A sudden mishap jolts the crowd. A paddle slips, splashing hot stew dangerously close to the ground. Gasps ripple, but the cook recovers with practiced calm. He mutters a prayer under his breath, then resumes stirring as though nothing happened. A nearby musician plucks a playful note, turning the accident into part of performance. Laughter follows, tension broken, and the feast continues. You notice how the cooks never stop tasting. One dips his fingers, licks quickly, then nods. Another tosses in a pinch of pepper, grinning as the steam carries its sharp scent toward the nobles. Even the smallest adjustment feels deliberate, a reminder that these towering bowls are more than excess. They're balanced creations, crafted with care. And yet, the cooks themselves remain largely unseen, tucked at the edge of the banquet. Guests applaud the abundance. Nobles praise the king, but the hand-stirring cauldrons fade into the smoke. You feel a pang of recognition. The invisible labor of history, always there, rarely sung. The grout must sense it too, for his chant shifts subtly, praising those who bend over fire so the empire may sit tall. The cooks glance up, startled at the acknowledgement, then smile quietly before returning to their work. You let the moment settle. The rice mountains may dazzle, the gold may gleam, but without these cooks, faces sweaty, clothes singed, arms aching, the banquet would collapse into chaos. Tonight, their paddles are wands, their cauldrons are cauldrons of alchemy, and every guest, yourself included, eats from their conjuring. The smoke clears slightly, and your eyes are drawn to the vessels themselves. the bowls in which all this abundance rests. They are not plain containers. They are works of art, decorative pottery that gleams in the torchlight, patterns etched into clay as carefully as a Grat's story carved into memory. Some are glazed with subtle earth tones, others painted in swirls of black and red that ripple across their curves. You realize these aren't just serving bowls. They are symbols, declarations that only nobles can dine from vessels so beautiful. One bowl catches your attention. Its rim is lined with tiny geometric triangles, repeating endlessly like teeth. The pattern seems to dance as the firelight flickers. A servant gently lowers it onto a mat, and even the nobles murmur in admiration. Historians note that pottery in the Mali Empire was both functional and ceremonial, crafted by skilled artisans who passed their designs down through generations. The quirky tidbit? Some bowls were said to be so large they doubled as bathtubs when not in use. You chuckle quietly, imagining a courtier soaking in yesterday's rice bowl like it's a luxury spa. You move closer and notice how some of the pottery carries marks, small indentations or painted lines that may have indicated ownership or status. One noble proudly points to his family's emblem carved into the side of a serving dish, boasting that their lineage always ate from such bowls. Others eye it with polite envy. The vessels themselves become part of the politics. To hold rice in a common pot is one thing, but to hold it in a bowl marked with your family's name is to say, "We belong here." Historians still argue whether these designs were purely decorative or whether they held deeper meaning, perhaps tied to spiritual beliefs. Some suggest patterns echoed river currents or celestial symbols. Others claim they were merely aesthetic. As you trace a finger along a swirl etched into clay, you feel both possibilities, beauty for beauty's sake, and beauty as hidden code. The bowls gleam not only with art, but with practical skill. Their clay is fired so evenly that not a crack mars the surface, even under the weight of mountains of rice. You watch servants pour steaming sauce into one vessel, the liquid pooling perfectly, no seepage, no fracture. It's a quiet triumph of craftsmanship. Without these bowls, the feast would literally collapse. And then, a small moment of humor. A servant tries to lift an especially large bowl with help from a companion, but they misjudge the weight. The bowl wobbles dangerously, the rice inside shifting like an avalanche about to fall. The crowd gasps, but they steady it just in time, earning nervous laughter. A courtier quips. Perhaps the bowl is hungry too, and the tension dissolves into chuckles. The Grat notices the incident and slips a quick verse into his chant, mocking the servant affectionately for wrestling with a clay giant. The nobles laugh again, delighted to see even mishaps woven into song. And so the bowls, heavy and unyielding, become more than silent objects. They are participants in the night's performance. You lean back, watching firelight shimmer across the pottery, each bowl a blend of art, function, and prestige. Rice may fill bellies, sauces may delight tongues, but the vessels themselves remind everyone that this is not a simple dinner. It is ceremony, artistry, and a quiet assertion of status. To eat from such bowls is to hold the empire in your hands, grain by grain, pattern by pattern. The music hums on, the bowls gleam in firelight, and you notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Beyond the palace courtyards, the gates open wider, and groups of townsfolk begin to enter. Farmers, artisans, even children tugging at their mothers' wraps. At first they hesitate, their steps cautious, but soon they are guided toward long wooden benches set up in the public square. Tonight's abundance will not stay confined to nobles. It spills outward into the streets, into the hands of ordinary people. Servants carry smaller but still heaping bowls into the open space. They place them on mats, and instantly the crowd leans in, eyes bright. You feel a swell of warmth watching the rice shared so freely, as if the empire itself stretches an arm outward and says, "Here, take part in this plenty." Historians note that great rulers often stage public feasts after royal banquets, both as a gesture of generosity and as a political tool. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts describe children darting under benches to sneak extra handfuls, their mothers pretending not to notice while quietly encouraging the mischief. The public feast has its own rhythm. There is less ceremony, fewer rules, more laughter. People eat with gusto, hands diving into rice without hesitation. A boy balances a rice ball precariously before shoving it into his mouth, grinning as grains scatter across his cheeks. His sister bursts out laughing, nearly choking on her own bite. You can't help but chuckle, reminded of modern family dinners where manners dissolve the moment food hits the table. Historians still argue whether these public feasts were truly open to everyone or mainly to those connected to court, merchants, soldiers, skilled workers. But tonight, looking around, you see a mix of faces. Wrinkled elders with scarred hands from farming tools, youths who smell faintly of blacksmith smoke, women with baskets still on their backs, as if they came straight from market stalls. Whoever they are, they're eating, and that in itself feels revolutionary. The griot moves between groups, adjusting his song to match their mood. His verses become playful here, teasing farmers about their muddy feet or children about their sticky fingers. The laughter that follows is genuine, loud, unrestrained. The feast no longer feels like a polished performance. It feels like life itself, abundant, messy, joyous. A merchant pulls out a small pouch and sprinkles dried fruit into a communal bowl, adding a personal touch. Another passes around strips of smoked meat from his own stock. It's as if the generosity of the court sparks generosity in return, each person contributing a little to the shared abundance. One old man leans back, rice grains clinging stubbornly to his beard. He sighs contentedly and mutters, "The king is wise." Full bellies make quiet mouths. His neighbors laugh. But the truth lingers in the air. This feast is as much about politics as it is about food. An empire feeds its people, and in return, the people offer loyalty. The torches flicker, shadows dancing across smiling faces. Somewhere a baby begins to cry, soothed quickly with a dab of rice on its lips. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the laughter, the music, and the scent of rice wash over you. And when you open them again, the public feast feels like an extension of the royal one. Different in polish, but equal in spirit. Tonight, no one leaves hungry. The noise of the public feast blends seamlessly with a new presence at the edges of the courtyard. A cluster of traveling griots steps forward, their voices carrying across the square like warm wind. You watch as they settle themselves on low stools, chorus resting across their laps, balafons ready at their feet. Their eyes glint with mischief, and you sense that the real entertainment is just beginning. One griot clears his throat dramatically, holding the pause long enough to hush nearby chatter. Then his voice unfurls in a rolling chant, words tumbling smooth and rhythmic. The genealogy of kings, the victories of generals, the rise of the empire. His voice is deep and hypnotic, drawing you in like a tide. Historians note that griots were not mere entertainers, but living libraries, guardians of memory, who preserve history through performance. The quirky tidbit: some griots were said to recite lineages so long they lasted days. Their audience is forced to take breaks for meals and naps while the griot continued undaunted. As the chant swells, another griot joins in, plucking his kora, weaving melody between the words. A third strikes the balafon, wooden notes dancing like sparks from the fire. Soon, a story unfolds. How caravans cross deserts heavy with salt, how rivers swell with fish, how rice fields gleamed under the sun. The banquet itself becomes part of the tale, immortalized as both fact and fable. You watch nobles nod gravely, lips pressed in pride, while children gape wide-eyed, rice forgotten in their hands. The griot's story is half history, half magic, its rhythm soothing yet playful. He makes a joke about how even the rice bowls tonight are so large that one grain could hide a mouse, and the crowd erupts in laughter. You find yourself laughing too, imagining a tiny mouse building a fortress inside the mountain of rice. Historians still argue whether griots exaggerated freely or whether their embellishments were coded truths meant to teach lessons. Whatever the case, their words hold power. They can elevate a king to legend or quietly mock a noble who overreaches. The griot's sly smile suggests they know exactly how far they can push before it just turns to offense. The performance continues, weaving seamlessly from praise to satire. One griot sings of a past feast where a noble's robe caught fire from standing too close to a torch. The audience roars with laughter, the noble in question blushing but joining in. It's a reminder that memory here is not stiff and cold. It's alive, playful, human, as their voices rise together. The air feels thick with story, as if the past itself is sitting down to eat beside you. Rice, goat, fish, spices. They're all part of the narrative, symbols woven into Mali's identity. And you, a guest in this echoing courtyard, realize you're not just watching history. You're listening to it, tasting it, becoming part of it. The griots finish a verse with a long, drawn-out note, letting the silence that follows hang like incense in the air. The crowd exhales, some clapping softly, others humming the refrain. And then the music begins again, promising more tales, more laughter, more history folded into melody until the night itself feels like one endless song. The griots' voices still echo in your ears when your gaze shifts to a lighter scene unfolding just beyond the bowls. Children are spilling into the open spaces of the courtyard, their bellies full, their energy anything but spent. They dart between benches, weaving through robes, their laughter ringing sharper than any instrument. While nobles debate politics and griots spin legends, these youngsters invent games on the spot, turning scraps and gourds into toys. One boy kicks a hollow gourd across the ground like a ball, his bare feet thumping against clay. Another chases after him, arms flailing wildly, and soon the gourd is passed around in a makeshift match. The rules are unclear. Maybe there are none, but the shrieks of victory and mock outrage make the game real enough. A girl claps her hands rhythmically, chanting something that sounds like a counting rhyme. You lean closer, realizing even play becomes a kind of oral tradition. Words pass from child to child like heirlooms disguised as nonsense. Historians note that children in the Mali Empire often imitated adult roles during games, practicing skills they would one day need. The quirky tidbit? Some travelers claim they saw youngsters pretending to conduct mock trials, complete with miniature judges and witnesses. You smile at the thought, child-sized courtrooms unfolding in the dust, while real nobles sat yards away at royal banquets. Tonight, the games mirror the feast itself. A boy stacks leftover gourds into a wobbling tower, pretending it's a rice mountain. His friends cheer when it topples, scattering across the courtyard like a miniature avalanche. You chuckle quietly, remembering the noble earlier who joked that children could get lost circling the real rice bowls. Perhaps these kids would love nothing more than to climb those steaming slopes. Historians still argue about how much children participated in public feasts. Were they truly welcome at noble tables, or did they hover at the edges, sneaking bites when they could? Watching them tonight, you see no barriers. Mothers dip rice for toddlers. Fathers laugh as older kids steal scraps of fish. The joy is infectious, reminding you that abundance is never fully measured by gold or spice, but by the sound of children laughing with full bellies. A sudden squeal breaks through as two boys wrestle over the gourd ball. They tumble into the dust, rolling dangerously close to a noble's robes. Gasps ripple, but instead of anger, the noble chuckles, lifting his garment just in time. The boys freeze, wide-eyed, before the noble waves them off with a smile. The crowd laughs, and the boys scamper away, grinning sheepishly. Even in a court of power, laughter makes space. One little girl sits cross-legged near you, humming to herself as she draws patterns in the dirt with her finger. They look suspiciously like the designs on noble pottery, spirals, triangles, repeating lines. You wonder if she's tracing her future already, practicing the art she'll one day etch into bowls that hold rice for another feast. The night deepens, stars thickening above, yet the children seem tireless. Their laughter rises like fireflies into the dark, each spark a reminder that the Empire's future isn't written only by scribes or griots. It's sketched in the games of children, their joy carrying as much weight as gold caravans or royal decrees. And in that moment, you realize the banquet is more than food. It's a playground for memory, for continuity, for the small voices that will one day carry Mali forward. The laughter of children fades into background as you notice a cluster of strangers standing near the main entrance, their clothing setting them apart from the locals. Long robes dyed in foreign styles, turbans of unusual shapes, and even a few beards trimmed in ways unfamiliar to your eyes. These are ambassadors, envoys from lands beyond the empire, invited to witness the spectacle of Mali's abundance. They stand stiffly at first, clearly overwhelmed by the mountains of rice and rivers of sauce. One man whispers in Arabic to his companion, his eyebrows raised so high you can almost hear the disbelief in his tone. Another, perhaps from North Africa, touches a bead of amber at his neck, as if to steady himself against the century onslaught. Historians note that ambassadors often attended such feasts as part of diplomatic exchanges. Their reports later carried back across deserts and seas. The quirky tidbit? Some envoys supposedly wrote more about the food than the politics, marveling at rice heaps while barely mentioning treaties. You smile. Who can blame them? Politics is dry, but rice soaked in peanut sauce is unforgettable. The ambassadors are guided to a place of honor, seated where they can see both the king and the bowls. Servants bring them cups of millet beer, and you watch as one takes a cautious sip, then quickly another. His surprised grin earns a laugh from nearby courtiers. You suspect he expected bitterness and instead found comfort. Earthy, tangy, unexpectedly smooth. They lean toward each other, gesturing at the dishes. One gestures with his hand high in the air, perhaps saying, "The rice is taller than my child." Another shakes his head, murmuring, "Even Cairo has never seen this." Historians still argue about how much of these reports were exaggerated to impress readers back home, but you can see the awe on their faces. It isn't performance, it's genuine shock at such abundance. A griot notices them and slips a line into his chant. Strangers from afar, may they carry word of Mali's bounty. The ambassadors glance up, startled to be included, then smile politely as the crowd applauds. You imagine their future letters. The empire is wealthy beyond imagining, its king generous, its banquets endless. And just like that, Mali's reputation grows, not only by trade and war, but by spoonfuls of rice lifted to foreign lips. One envoy tries rolling rice into a ball, mimicking the locals. It collapses in his hand, grain scattering onto his robe. The nearby children laugh, and the envoy, blushing, joins in the laughter. A noble leans over, demonstrates a technique with practiced fingers, and hands the envoy a perfect ball. The gesture breaks barriers more quickly than any treaty ever could. The ambassadors exchange glances, and you can almost hear their thoughts. This empire is not only rich, it is generous, open, confident enough to share abundance with outsiders. And in that moment, the bowls of rice become more than food. They become soft weapons of diplomacy, converting skepticism into admiration, strangers into allies. As torches crackle and the music swells, you realize the empire doesn't just feed its people tonight. It feeds the world's imagination. And every astonished envoy, every scribbled report, carries Mali's banquet across continents like a story too marvelous not to retell. The envoys settle into their seats, still murmuring in awe, when the courtyard grows quieter. A group of imams steps forward, their white robes glowing in the firelight. Turbans wrapped neatly, voices low as they begin to chant blessings. You feel the shift immediately. Where a moment ago the air was full of laughter and music, now it carries a solemn hush, a reminder that even abundance must be acknowledged with gratitude. They raise their hands, palms upward, and recite verses from Quran, words flowing in melodic cadence that seems to weave around the smell of rice and goat stew. The blessing lingers over bowls, sanctifying before fingers dive in again. Historians note that religion permeated every aspect of courtly life in the Mali Empire, especially after the famous pilgrimage of Musa Musa to Mecca. The quirky tidbit? Some chronicles suggest that entire feasts pause mid-course for extra prayers if a scholar of great renown happened to be present, turning dinner into a mini-seminar devotion. The crowd bows their heads respectfully. Even children hush, though one boy peeks sideways and sticks his tongue out at a friend until his mother delivers a swift pinch to his arm. You hide a smile, reminded that solemnity and childhood rarely walk hand in hand. The imam's chant of gratitude for the river that brings fish, for the fields that yield rice, for the herds that provide meat, and for the salt that seasons life. Their words feel like a mirror of everything you've witnessed tonight, spoken now in spiritual cadence. You sense that the act of eating here is not simply indulgence. It's an extension of worship, a way to honor creation by savoring it. Historians still argue whether such blessings were brief formalities or extended ceremonies woven deeply into the banquet's rhythm. Some accounts describe only a short prayer before the first scoop, while others claim entire passages were recited between courses. Watching the imams tonight, you can believe either version. Their voices stretch like silk, and time itself seems to pause. When the prayer ends, the imam closest to the king dips his hand into the central bowl, scoops a ball of rice, and raises it high before placing it carefully into his mouth. The gesture signals that the feast may resume. A wave of motion follows, hundreds of hands dipping back into bowls, laughter returning like water after a dam breaks. The musicians pick up a soft rhythm again, careful not to overpower the lingering reverence. You hear a courtier murmur, "Even rice tastes different after a blessing." His neighbor smirks and replies, "Perhaps you're just hungrier after waiting." Both laugh, but you sense truth in the first man's words. The food does feel change, touched by something beyond seasoning. A servant brushes past you with another tray, muttering as it goes, "Rice waits for no one, but blessings hold it still." The phrase sticks in your mind, as though the servants themselves have their own proverbs born of long nights like this. The firelight shimmers, the bowls steam anew, and you realize the banquet is not just a performance of wealth and politics. It is also a prayer, each by a reminder that abundance is fragile, gifted, fleeting, and worth honoring. And as you dip your own hand into the rice once more, you feel the blessing settle quietly in your chest, as comforting as the food itself. The prayers fade into memory, and the feast resumes with renewed vigor. But as you sit among the bowls and laughter, you begin to notice a pattern in the timing of such gatherings. The nobles talk about harvests, about rains that came early or late, about seasons that bend either in mercy or in cruelty. You realize the rhythm of the banquet isn't random. It's tethered to the earth's own cycles, to the steady drumbeat of seasons. Rice is abundant tonight because the river's floods were generous. The goats are plump because the grasses grew long in the savannah. Even the spices that traveled across deserts arrived safely because caravans could move in dry months without drowning in mud. Historians note that great feasts in the Mali Empire often coincided with harvest festivals, moments when the land's gifts were gathered and gratitude demanded display. The quirky tidbit? Some sources suggest that if rains failed, feasts shrank dramatically, and nobles masked the shortage with more music and longer prayers, hoping spectacle would disguise scarcity. You grin softly, imagining courtiers clapping harder to cover their rumbling stomachs. You glance upward where the night sky spreads wide, stars glittering like spilled salt. You imagine farmers gazing at the same constellations weeks earlier, predicting when a flood fields, when a plant shoots. Their calculations ripple forward to this very moment, to the bowls steaming in the courtyard. The feast, you realize, is less about tonight than about months of patience culminating here. The griot adjusts chant accordingly. He sings of harvest moons, of fields bending under grain, of villagers singing while they reap. His voice threads through the feast, reminding everyone that abundance comes not from chance but from rhythm. Sun, rain, earth, river, repeat. You feel lulled by the cycle, the repetition soothing, as though the empire itself breathes in seasons. Historians still argue whether the king dictated the feast calendar strictly or whether local traditions shaped timing. Some say imperial astrologers advised on the best days, aligning stars with sowing and harvesting. Others insist it was simpler. When the fields gave, the tables followed. Whatever the case, you sense the practical truth. Food is empire, and empire is food. At one edge of the courtyard, a group of farmers, invited as a gesture of honor, lift cups of millet beer together, toasting the season. Their laughter is rough, unpolished, but genuine, echoing across the torches. You smile, realizing they're toasting not only the king, but their own sweat. Without their hands in mud, there would be no music, no courtiers, no astonished envoys. The torches sway slightly in the evening breeze, their flames like harvest fires. You inhale deeply. The scent of rice, goat, fish, and peanut sauce now layer with the faint smoke of wood. The season is given generously this year, and the feast glows with that truth. Yet in the back of your mind, you wonder, what about years when the river fails, when skies withhold rain? The laughter will be thinner then, the bowls smaller, the griot's songs more wistful. But tonight, the rhythm holds. The bowls overflow. The season has been kind, and the Mali Empire answers with gratitude and spectacle. You let yourself sink into that abundance, soothed by the steady cycle of seasons that has carried humanity through hunger and plenty since time began. The night deepens, and with it comes a new aroma curling to the courtyard, earthy, yeasty, faintly sweet. You glance toward the edges of the feast and spot servants carrying gourds, their mouths frothing with pale foam. Millet beer, the drink of farmers, soldiers, and nobles alike, though tonight it flows more freely than water. The gourds are handed down rows, clay cups dipped into their bellies and passed hand to hand. You take one and raise it to your nose. The scent is heavy, warm, almost like fresh bread mingled with sour fruit. You take a sip, thick on the tongue, slightly gritty, with a tang that prickles the edges of your mouth. It's not wine, not ale, but something older, earthier, closer to the soil itself. Historians note that millet beer was brewed in nearly every village across West Africa. Each recipe slightly different depending on who stirred the pot. The quirky tidbit? Some brewers used hollowed calabash gourds as fermentation vessels, and the foam was considered so important that a flat batch might be discarded. You smile, imagining a brewer scolding, "No bubbles, no banquet." The servants bustle with the gourds, careful not to spill. One young boy tries to carry two at once, nearly topples, then rights himself with a triumphant grin. The crowd cheers, turning his near disaster into comedy. Even here, with all the grandeur, clumsiness earns applause. As you sip again, the music shifts. Drummers strike a deeper rhythm, steady and pulsing, perfectly suited to the buzz settling into the crowd. Voices grow louder, laughter freer. You hear a nobleman slurring slightly as he praises a goat stew for being as tender as poetry, while a companion teases him that he's drunk enough to mistake rice for gold. Historians still argue whether millet beer was considered sacred at royal feasts or merely customary. Some sources suggest prayers were spoken over the first gourd, offering thanks to ancestors before drinking. Others say it was treated simply as refreshment, though still symbolic of community. Watching the crowd tonight, you sense it is both a binding drink that blurs class lines as surely as it blurs vision. A grat picks up on the mood, slipping playful verses into his song. He chants of rice that dances when beer flows, and of nobles who sway like trees in the wind. The crowd roars with laughter, some nobles even clapping along despite being the butt of the joke. It's clear that millet beer loosens not only tongues but hierarchies. You take another sip, letting the warmth spread down your throat. It tastes of the fields, of harvest, of patient hands stirring bubbling pots in village courtyards. Every gulp is a reminder that this empire doesn't just trade in gold and salt. It thrives on grain, fermented into something that makes even the most solemn noble tap his foot to a drummer's beat. And as the gourds continue to circle, foam spilling, laughter swelling, you realize the banquet is no longer just food. It's a celebration of drink, of loosened spirits, of the way millet can be transformed into joy itself. Tonight, the empire doesn't only feed its people, it lets them drink deep of the land, the season, and the shared intoxication of abundance. The millet beer has loosened the air, and the drummers take full advantage. Their hands blur across taut skins, rhythms sharp and insistent, daring the crowd to clap along. You watch as one musician shoots a glance at the kora player, then launches into a furious roll that rattles the bowls. The kora responds with a cascade of plucked notes, nimble and teasing. It's a dual disguised as harmony, and the courtyard leans in, grinning. The nobles pretend not to notice at first, but soon even they can't resist smiling. The competition is obvious. Who can draw louder cheers, the drummers with their thunder or the string players with their sparkle? Historians note that musical rivalries were common in West African courts, often staged intentionally to liven gatherings. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts mention musicians throwing playful insults mid-song, slipping them into lyrics so quickly that only the sharpest listeners caught the jab. You tilt your head, half sure you hear one kora player mutter something about drums being just noisy pots. The drummers grin wolfishly and pound harder, their beats echoing off clay walls like rolling storms. The sound fills your chest, reverberating in your ribs, until you feel you could march for miles without tiring. Across from them, the kora players dig in, strings twanging so brightly they sparkle above the drums like lightning flashing in storm clouds. The contrast is electric, and suddenly the banquet feels less like a meal and more like a contest stage for the gods themselves. Historians still argue whether these rivalries were spontaneous or carefully orchestrated parts of banquets. Some claim they were genuine competitions, with winners gaining prestige and extra rewards. Others believe they were scripted performances, designed to keep the crowd awake while cooks prepared the next round of dishes. Watching tonight, you suspect it's both pride and performance locked together in rhythm. The crowd responds in kind. Children leap up, stomping feet in mock imitation of drummers. A few farmers clap deliberately offbeat just to tease. One noble woman shakes her head and laughs, muttering that the strings sound like gossiping birds. Her neighbor retorts that at least birds sing sweeter than thunder. Around you, the banter flows as freely as the beer. Then, in a flourish, one drummer spins a stick theatrically, only to fumble and nearly drop it. Gasps ripple. But he recovers, striking the skin with a booming crash that makes the crowd cheer louder than before. He bows exaggeratedly, as though the stumble was part of the act all along. The kora player raises an eyebrow, plucks a slow, sarcastic scale, and the laughter grows. The griot seizes a moment, improvising a verse about drums that stumble yet land on their feet, strings that gossip but still shine in the night. The crowd roars, caught between admiration and amusement. You realize this isn't just music. It's theater, woven into feasts like spice into stew. And as the rhythms merge again, rivalries forgotten, the courtyard exhales in one long, satisfied sigh. The music softens, settling into a lull that blends with the scent of rice and stew. You lean back, smiling at the playful contest. Even in the grandest of empires, even at feasts meant to impress ambassadors and nobles, people still crave the joy of rivalry, the thrill of a joke at a friend's expense, the simple pleasure sound filling the night. The rivalry of musicians fades, and the night drifts into a gentler rhythm. You wander toward the edge of the courtyard, where the air smells different, smoky, earthy, tinged with the sharp tang of drying fish. Behind the main feast, servants and cooks tend to structures that look almost like sheds, low and dark, smoke curling lazily from their roofs. This is where food preservation takes place, the silent backbone of abundance. You peer inside and see rows of fish hanging from wooden racks, their silver skins glistening faintly in firelight. The smoke curls around them like invisible hands, preserving them for weeks, even months. Historians note that smokehouses were crucial in Mali, ensuring the empire could feast year-round rather than just during harvests. The quirky tidbit? Some chronicles mention spices being rubbed directly onto the fish before smoking, giving them a flavor strong enough to perfume entire caravans. You chuckle, imagining a camel driver complaining, "Even my robes smell like fish stew now." Nearby, strips of goat meat lie across woven mats, drying in the night air. Salt from the Gaza has been rubbed in, crystals crunching under fingertips as servants press them deep into flesh. The process is methodical, almost hypnotic. Rub, hang, wait. You realize this reserved food is a hidden wealth of the empire, less flashy than gold, but far more practical. Gold can buy prestige, but dried fish feeds a village when rivers run lean. Historians still argue whether preserved food was stored mainly for the palace or distributed to markets and provinces. Some evidence suggests stockpiles were kept as emergency reserves, a kind of insurance policy against famine. Others argue the stores flowed constantly, traded across the empire's arteries. Standing here, you see the truth doesn't matter as much as the practice itself. Without preservation, tonight's feast would be fleeting, gone with the season. With it, the empire stretches its abundance across time. A servant coughs in the smoke, waves the haze from his eyes, then grins when he notices you watching. The fish argue less when they're quiet, he jokes, tapping a hanging row. The sound is hollow, almost like wind chimes. You laugh softly. Humor blooms even in the humblest corners. Further along, gourds are filled with dried grains, sealed with wax to keep insects out. The containers line the walls like silent soldiers, their round shapes casting shadows that ripple in torchlight. Each gourd is a promise of porridge in lean months, of beer in future feasts, of life carried forward. The griot, never far from action, passes by and slips a verse into his chant. Smoke rises, salt bites, gourds guard the ear. The words ripple like smoke itself, folding preservation into poetry. For the nobles in the courtyard, the verse is background. For you, standing here, it feels like revelation. You step back, inhaling the mingled scents of rice, stew, smoke, and salt. The feast dazzles with immediacy, but the smokehouses whisper something quieter. Endurance. Tonight's abundance is not wasteful. It is strategic, calculated, sustained. And as you watch servants tend racks of drying fish with care, you understand that Mali's power is not only in gold caravans or towering rice bowls. It lies also in the smoky corner, where the empire quietly teaches itself how to last. You step back into the glow of the courtyard, but your curiosity tugs you toward another lively scene. Market stalls just beyond the palace walls. Even on a night of banquets, the marketplace hums like a heartbeat. Lanterns swing above wooden tables piled high with peppers, onions, garlic, and gourds, their colors bright against the night. Traders call out half-heartedly, not needing to convince anyone. The feast has made every buyer eager. You drift among the stalls, the scents shifting with each step. One corner brims with sharp onions that make your eyes water even before you slice them. Another bursts with peppers glowing red and green, their heat so strong you cough just by leaning too close. A woman grinds them into paste with mortar and pestle, her arms moving steadily as if she's stirring fire itself. Historians note that markets were vital in connecting villages to cities, with farmers, herders, and fishermen converging weekly to sell their goods. The quirky tidbit? Some markets doubled as matchmaking hubs, where young people accidentally bumped into one another while pretending to buy peppers. You grin. Romance, it seems, has always found an excuse to shop. The sellers tonight are as much performers as merchants. One lifts an onion high, boasting loudly that it brings tears only of joy. Another waves a bunch of green herbs under a noble's nose, promising they'll turn rice into poetry. You laugh quietly at the exaggerated pitches. Some things never change, from medieval Mali to modern supermarkets with special offers. Historians still argue whether these markets were tightly regulated by the empire or ran more freely under local leaders. Some sources mention officials setting fair prices. Others suggest haggling was the law of the land. Watching tonight, you sense a mix. A noble servant pays full price without question, while a farmer slaps coins into his palm only after a loud, theatrical debate. Children dash between stalls, clutching sticky fingers full of honey cakes bought with leftover coins. One boy tries to sneak a pepper into his friend's food as a prank, but the victim yelps before it touches his lips, chasing him through the crowd. The laughter draws smiles even from weary vendors. The music of the courtyard drifts faintly here, but the marketplace has its own rhythm. The clatter of jars, the thud of pestles, the laughter of buyers. It feels less formal, less polished, but just as essential. Without these stalls, there would be no spices for sauces, no onions for stews, no peppers to jolt the tongue awake. You pause at a table stacked with dried herbs. The seller, an old woman with sharp eyes, presses a handful into your palm. The leaves smell faintly of mint and smoke. She whispers, for digestion after too much rice. You chuckle at her bluntness, tuck the herbs into your pouch, and realize she's right. You'll need them. The griot wanders through, weaving the market into his chant. Where onions cry and peppers laugh, the feast is born. His voice rises above the din, reminding everyone that even the simplest stalls are threads in the empire's tapestry. You look back toward the courtyard where nobles feast from decorated bowls, then at the market where farmers sell peppers for a few coins. Both worlds meet tonight in rice, sauce, and spice. And you realize, without this noisy, messy, fragrant market, the grandeur of the palace banquet would collapse like a table missing its legs. You slip back into the courtyard, where laughter now mixes with something sharper, the murmured negotiations of nobles. Between bites of rice and sips of millet beer, they lean toward one another, their voices low, their gestures precise. You realize that while the feast dazzles on the surface, beneath it simmers the politics of the empire, as carefully spiced as the sauces on the bowls. One noble taps the rim of his cup as he whispers about caravan routes, his words nearly drowned by the drummer's beat. Another nods gravely, promising to send men to guard the salt convoys. A third, wiping rice from his beard, insists his village should be rewarded with new herds for loyalty. Historians note that banquets doubled as political councils, where disputes were softened by full stomachs and rivalries dissolved, at least temporarily, in sauce and beer. The quirky tidbit? Some chronicles hint that nobles purposely delayed serious debates until after everyone had eaten, believing hungry men sharpen knives, full men dull them. You grin, an ancient endorsement of never argue on an empty stomach. The king's presence hovers above it all. He sits elevated, saying little, his silence weightier than speeches. Courtiers glance at him nervously before making promises, as though the rice itself carries his approval. When he finally raises a hand, even slightly, voices fall still. A nod from him feels like a decree. A frown could turn laughter into dread. Historians still argue whether real decisions were made at these feasts or merely confirmed, with actual deals struck in private chambers later. Watching tonight, you suspect the truth lies in between. The bowls of rice act as stage props, reminders of abundance, symbols of control. Agreements forged over steaming food may not be binding, but they are sealed with memory. We ate together. We pledged together. Not all politics are serious, though. One noble tries to boast of his herd size, gesturing wide, only for a mischievous griot to sing a verse comparing his cattle to thin shadows wandering the plain. The courtyard erupts in laughter, and the noble reddens, muttering into his rice. You chuckle. It seems public satire is as much a check on pride as any decree. Meanwhile, merchants seated near the edges quietly calculate. You see them fingering prayer beads while whispering about profits. How much pepper sold? How much fish gained in trade? How many caravans will leave in the morning? Even here, amid noble boasting, the hum of commerce is constant. The smell of stew wafts across, rich with cloves and salted fish. You take a bite, and suddenly the weight of it all hits you. This isn't just dinner. It's governance disguised as a meal. Power is negotiated with rice. Alliance is cemented with goat stew. Loyalty rewarded with second helpings. A servant mutters as he passes, "Empty bowls make poor allies." You smile, recognizing wisdom in his words. Tonight, politics tastes as much of peanut sauce as it does of strategy. And as nobles dip their fingers into the rice, you realize they're not only feeding themselves, they're feeding the empire's future bite by bite. The political murmurs soften as the griots reclaim attention, their voices blending with a hush that settles across the courtyard. One griot steps forward, his robes glowing in the torchlight, his kora cradled like a child. He plucks a single note, then begins to sing, not of kings or battles this time, but of ancestors. The sound slows the feast, as if even the rice mountains bow to memory. He tells of hunters who followed the Niger before villages were born, of grandmothers who taught songs by firelight, of fathers who tilled the same fields their sons now work. His voice is low, steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You feel the hairs on your arms rise, though the night air is warm. Historians note that ancestor veneration was deeply woven into West African societies, blending seamlessly with Islamic practice. The quirky tidbit? Some tales claim spirits of the departed lingered near bowls of food, tasting steam as offerings. You glance at the rising curls from the rice and imagine unseen ancestors breathing them in, satisfied. Around you, nobles and commoners alike lower their heads. Some close their eyes, lips moving silently in personal prayers. Even children fidget less, sensing the weight of the moment. The griot chants of blessings inherited, of burdens carried, of the duty to keep memory alive. His words ripple like water across the courtyard. We are not here alone. We eat with those who came before. Historians still argue whether these ancestor invocations were formal rituals tied to state religion, or more informal traditions folded into feasts. Watching tonight, you sense it matters little. The effect is undeniable. The living are tethered to the past, rice bowls becoming bridges between generations. The musicians support him gently. A balafion's notes soft as raindrops, a drum pulsing like a heartbeat. Together they create an atmosphere that feels less like performance and more like invocation. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you hear not just instruments but voices beneath the voices. Echoes of those long gone. A noble nearby lifts a handful of rice and lets it fall back into the bowl, whispering, "For my father, Another presses a morsel of goat against his lips, then sets it aside untouched and offering. The simplicity of the gesture strikes you. No pomp, just quiet remembrance woven into eating. Then, as though sensing the heaviness might linger too long, the griot shifts tone. He sings a playful verse about an ancestor who supposedly ate an entire goat at one sitting. Laughter erupts, the spell softening, yet the reverence remains beneath it. Humor, it seems, is allowed even in communion with the past. The torches sputter, smoke curling upward like ghostly fingers. You watch the steam rise from the bowls, mingling with torch smoke, drifting toward the stars. In that mingling, you feel the presence of countless lives that built this empire, farmers, traders, mothers, warriors, eating with you in silence. And as the chant fades, you realize this banquet is not just a living. It is a table stretched across time, with seats reserved for every ancestor who ever bent over a rice field, guided a caravan, or lifted a ladle in a smoky kitchen. Tonight they eat too. The ancestral chants linger in the air, but now the griots shift again, their voices weaving stories of places far beyond the courtyard. They speak of Timbuktu, the bustling city of scholars, where libraries grow like forests and ink flows thicker than wine. They sing of Jen, with its great mosque rising like a mountain of clay, walls smoothed each year by hands of hundreds. And they murmur of Gao, the jewel along the river, where merchants bargain until the stars fade. The crowd listens intently, chewing slowly, as though each city is being tasted along with the rice. Historians note that Mali's power was anchored not only in gold and grain, but also in its cities, centers of trade, learning, and worship. The quirky tidbit? Some travelers reported that book markets in Timbuktu were so lively that manuscripts were traded like spices, their prices sometimes higher than horses. You smile at the thought of merchants saying, "Forget salt, I'll take 3 volumes of poetry." You picture it vividly. Dusty streets crowded with scholars in flowing robes, debating law while scribes dip pens into inkwells. Students huddle in courtyards, memorizing verses until their voices hoarse, while traders nearby argue over sacks of pepper. The banquet seems to stretch outward, linking this courtyard to every street where Mali's pulse beats. Historians still argue whether the empire cities rival Cairo or Baghdad in scale, but what is clear is their reputation. Envoys carried tales of wealth. Scholars carried manuscripts. Merchants carried spices. And all paths circle back here, to banquets where the empire proved itself not just wealthy, but learned. A griot plucks his kora and sings of Sankor University, where teachers lecture beneath open skies. He teases that even the fish in the Niger might earn degrees if they listen long enough. The crowd bursts into laughter, children especially, delighted at the thought of scholarly catfish. The ambassadors in attendance nod solemnly, clearly impressed by the emphasis on knowledge. One scribbles notes on parchment, perhaps already composing a report for his homeland. This empire not only feasts, it studies, it builds, it remembers. As the story winds on, you glance at the bowls of rice again, realizing they're more than food. They're metaphors for the empire itself. Each grain a city, each sauce a trade route, each layer a testimony to connections that stretch across deserts, rivers, and centuries. The night sky deepens, stars thickening like grain scattered across black silk. You wonder how many of those stars guided caravans to Timbuktu, or lit the faces of scholars bent over books, or reflected in the river as fishermen dreamed of tomorrow's catch. And here you are in a courtyard, tasting rice that carries the flavor of those same stars. The griots close the tale with a verse praising cities as bowls of wisdom never empty. The crowd claps softly, reverently, as though bowing to Timbuktu itself. And in that moment, you understand. The banquet celebrates not just food, not just ancestors, but the empire's mind, its spirit, its cities standing tall like rice mountains built of clay, books, and dreams. The songs of cities drift into silence, and you feel a sudden dampness in the air. A breeze carries the earthy smell of wet soil, and your thoughts turn toward the rainy season. The time when the empire bends the weather, when banquets like this one must adapt to the sky's moods. You picture the courtyard slick with mud, nobles lifting their robes to keep hems dry, servants sliding dangerously while carrying bowls twice their size. The rains transform everything. Rice fields swell with water. Rivers overflow their banks, and villages move in rhythm with thunder and lightning. Historians note that the rainy season shaped the very schedule of the empire, dictating when caravans paused and when planning began. The quirky tidbit? Some chronicles describe children sailing toy boats made from hollow gourds down flooded streets, racing them as if storms were festivals. You grin. Leave it to children to find joy in the mess that adults curse. You imagine a banquet held during heavy rains. Torches sputtering, flames fighting the damp air, musicians drumming louder to drown out thunder, servants trudging through ankle-deep mud with jars of millet beer, their faces grim but determined. Even nobles who complain less about soggy roads once the first spoonful of hot rice reached their mouths. Food, after all, has always been better at calming tempers than speeches. Historians still argue whether feasts during the rainy season were scaled back or made more extravagant to defy the gloom. Some accounts suggest kings doubled the spectacle, declaring that no storm could dim their abundance. Others insist simplicity ruled, as supplies were harder to move. Watching the mist drift through the courtyard tonight, you can almost believe both stories at once. A servant brushes mud from his sandals before stepping back into the courtyard. He mutters, "The rice grows fat in rain, but so do the puddles." His complaint earns a chuckle from nearby cooks who know the truth. Without the season's floods, the mountains of rice would vanish. The Griot adds a line to his chant. Rain is guest and host, bringing both mud and plenty. His voice carries over the crowd, reminding everyone that tonight's feast, like the empire itself, is married to the sky. You close your eyes for a moment and hear it. The imagined patter of rain on clay roofs, the slosh of sandals through puddles, the crackle of torches battling wet air. And you realize that even in mud and storm, the banquet would persist. The bowls might look damp, the sauces might steam harder, but the rhythm, the sharing, the laughter, the unity, would remain untouched, flowing like rain itself across the empire. The thought of storms fades, replaced by a new rhythm in the courtyard. The ripple of conversation, as nobles and commoners alike trade stories about other lands. The feast has made everyone looser, more talkative, and soon the bowls of rice become maps of imagination. Fingers trace routes in the air, across deserts, along rivers, down a coast where ships bob like toys. One merchant brags of visiting Cairo, where minarets pierce the sky and markets burst with goods. Another boasts of trading in Morocco, where spices burn hotter and silks gleam brighter than any torch. Historians note that Mali's connections reach deep into North Africa and across the Mediterranean, each journey linking the empire to distant worlds. The quirky tidbit? Some travelers claim camels returning from Mali jingle with golden bells tied to their saddles, a showy advertisement of the wealth they carried. You imagine the racket. Every step a clink, a living marching band of fortune. The Griot seizes on these stories, singing verses of caravans stretching like snakes across dunes, of sailors steering by stars, of scholars carrying knowledge folded in manuscripts. His voice makes even distant lands feel as close as the rice bowl before you. The ambassadors nod gravely, clearly pleased to hear their own homelands woven into Mali's song. Historians still argue whether Mali's rulers fully understood the scope of their influence abroad, or if it was travelers like Ibn Battuta who exaggerated connections. What's certain is that stories traveled as surely as salt and gold. Tonight, those stories spill out like sauce over rice, binding the empire to lands far away. Nearby, a noble woman jokes that foreign traders come for gold, but stay for the rice. Her neighbors laugh, one quipping, if they tasted the peanut sauce, they'd never leave. The humor is light, but the truth lingers. Food is as much a diplomat as treaties. The drummers adjust their beat, mimicking the plodding steps of caravans. You feel in your chest, a steady pulse like camels crossing endless sand. The kora adds twinkling notes, stars guiding them forward. The courtyard transforms for a moment into a desert road, the bowls of rice into oases, the guests into wanderers pausing to refresh before moving on. You sip millet beer, letting the warmth spread as the stories continue. A trader swears he once saw a ship from Genoa dock near North Africa, its crew wide-eyed at the gold-dusted merchants of Mali. Another claims manuscripts from Andalusia circulate in Timbuktu, their ink barely dry before being debated by scholars. whether truth or boast. The effect is the same. The empire feels vast, plugged into a network stretching across half the known world. And as laughter swells again, you realize the banquet is not just feeding mouths. It's feeding imaginations, filling the air with visions of deserts, seas, and cities most here will never see. Mali's power is not only in what it grows, digs, or salts. It's how far its stories travel, carried by full bellies and satisfied smiles into the wide, waiting world. The stories of distant lands give way to quieter murmurs, tales of the empire's rulers themselves. You notice how people lean closer, voices lowered, as though speaking to kings carries its own gravity even at a banquet. The bowls may be enormous, but the shadow of the throne is larger still. One griot begins softly, plucking his kora as he sings of Sundiata Keita, the empire's legendary founder. He describes how Sundiata rose from exile, how his strength was foretold, how his armies shaped the empire like a potter shapes clay. The rice before you suddenly feel symbolic, grains gathered, unified, transformed into something greater than the sum of its parts. Historians note that Sundiata's story is one of Africa's great epics, told for centuries by griots who memorized every detail. The quirky tidbit? Some versions describe him walking only with difficulty as a child, until one day he pulled himself upright using a heavy iron rod that bent under his weight. You smile, picturing a boy wobbling to his feet, rice bowls cheering if they could. Another griot joins in, shifting the chant to Mansa Musa, the ruler whose name still sparkles across continents. He sings of the pilgrimage to Mecca, of gold scattered so freely it disrupted economies along the way, of scholars and architects brought back to raise mosques and schools. The nobles beam at the mention, pride filling their faces as though they themselves had walked behind Musa's caravan. Historians still argue about the scale of Musa's generosity. Did he truly spend so much gold in Cairo that its value dropped for years, or is it exaggeration, whether fact or fable? His legend looms large tonight, woven into every shimmering grain of rice. You imagine the bowls as mountains of treasure, each scoop a reminder of a king whose wealth seemed endless. A noble nearby mutters, half amused, half reverent, "Our rice may vanish tonight, but Musa's gold echoes forever." His neighbor replies with a grin, "Rice fills stomachs better than coins." The surrounding group chuckles, and you sense the balance of pride and practicality that sustains the empire. The griots move seamlessly between praise and humor. They tease about one ruler's fondness for elaborate robes, comparing him to a rooster strutting at dawn. Laughter ripples across the crowd, but beneath it is affection, a reminder that kings are human, too. You take another bite of rice, sauce dripping down your fingers, and realize you are tasting more than food. You are tasting the stories of rulers who shaped rivers of trade, who turned cities into centers of learning, who turned gold into legend. The banquet itself is their echo, a performance that says, "This is what our kings have built. This is what we inherit. This is what we share." The drummers shift into a stately rhythm, heavy and slow, like footsteps of rulers through history. The kora adds bright notes, like sparks of brilliance along the way. And for a few moments, the courtyard feels suspended, the bowls of rice rising not just as food, but as monuments to power, memory, and the rulers whose shadows still stretch across every bite. The night stretches deeper, yet the feast shows no sign of fading. If anything, the chatter grows more reflective, as though the weight of food and stories is turning minds toward what will come after. You notice younger men and women leaning toward elders, asking questions, seeking advice between mouthfuls of rice. The banquet has shifted from spectacle to quiet mentorship. One elder wipes goat sauce from his beard and begins explaining how caravans must be organized, how many camels, how much water, which routes to avoid during sandstorms. His listener nods earnestly, grains of rice clinging to his chin. Historians note that oral teaching at feasts was common, knowledge passed not in classrooms but in moments like these, over food. The quirky tidbit? Some apprentices reportedly memorize entire trade instructions by clapping rhythms while chewing rice, turning logistics into sing-song. You imagine someone today humming How to Budget while eating dinner and chuckle. Nearby, a woman teaches her daughter how to shape rice with sauce so it doesn't crumble, a small gesture that carries dignity. Food, she murmurs. Shows who you are. The girl tries, drops half her ball onto her lap, then bursts into laughter. The mother shakes her head, but smiles, too. Historians still argue whether these informal lessons at feasts were deliberate traditions or simply the natural byproduct of gathering generations together. Either way, you see how wisdom flows across the table as smoothly as peanut sauce. Politics may belong to nobles, wealth to kings, but knowledge is shared like rice, passed hand to hand, bite to bite. The grout notices and slips a verse into his chant. The young taste, the old teach, the feast continues. The line is simple, yet it settles over the courtyard like warm cloth. Everyone nods. Everyone understands. You glance toward the scribes in the corner. Their pens still scratch, but now you wonder how much of this, the jokes, the spilled rice, the quiet lessons, ever makes it to parchment. Probably little. The official record will show bowls, sauces, gold. But the real legacy, the knowledge braided into conversation, the pride tucked into small gestures, will live only in memory, passed down like seasoning in a family recipe. As the drums soften, you close your eyes and picture the future. You imagine another banquet decades from now, bowls pile high, children laughing, grouts singing, and someone repeating a lesson first whispered tonight. It strikes you that these feasts are less about one moment of abundance and more about continuity. They are bridges, carrying wisdom, laughter, and rice alike into the waiting hands of tomorrow. The courtyard feels heavier now, though not from gloom, more from fullness. Rice bowls that once tower like mountains are worn down to hills, sauces smeared along rims, bones neatly stacked at the edges. Servants move quietly, gathering scraps, while guests lean back against benches, bellies round, eyes glazed in satisfaction. The banquet is slowing, easing itself toward conclusion, like a song settling into its final notes. You notice how gestures change. Nobles who earlier argued with animated hands now move lazily, waving only to call for more millet beer. Children slump against their mothers, half asleep, still clutching sticky fingers. Even the musicians soften their pace, drumming in slow, steady patterns that echo like a heartbeat ready to drift into dreams. Historians note that the winding down of feasts was often as ceremonial as the opening, marked by quieter songs and the serving of lighter dishes. Fruit, honey cakes, sometimes milk. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts suggest that nobles believed ending on sweet flavors ensured sweet words in tomorrow's debates. You imagine a courtier biting into a honey cake and murmuring, "Well, I suppose I'll forgive you after all." A servant passes you a small plate. Slices of melon, bright against the torchlight, their juice dripping onto your fingers. The sweetness is refreshing after so much salt and spice, a gentle reminder that the feast is tilting toward closure. Around you, others sigh contentedly, some nibbling, others too full to take another bite. Historians still argue whether leftovers were gathered for redistribution or consumed entirely within the court. Some chronicles describe great care in dividing remaining food among servants and nearby villagers. Others claim nobles insisted every bowl be emptied to prove abundance. Watching tonight, you sense a balance. Bowls nearly scraped clean, but enough carried off to remind villages that the king's generosity extends past his gates. The grout adjusts his chant, lowering his voice. His verses now praise not conquests or caravans, but rest, the joy of a full belly, the peace of shared laughter, the gift of ancestors watching over satisfied children. His kora plucks fewer notes, softer, slower, as though coaxing the crowd toward calm. A noble nearby mutters with a grin, "The rice was taller than my pride, but now both have shrunk." His companions laugh softly, too weary for roaring amusement. Humor at this hour is gentler, like candlelight instead of fire. Servants place jars of cool water along the benches, and you sip gratefully. The liquid cuts through heaviness, soothing the throat after spices and beer. A breeze drifts in, carrying the faint scent of night flowers blooming beyond the walls. For the first time tonight, you notice crickets singing, their steady chirp blending with the soft drumming. The courtyard no longer feels like performance hall. It feels like a giant bedroom, where hundreds of souls prepare to sink into dreams. Rice, music, laughter, prayers, politics, all of it is folded into one long exhale. And as you lean back, Eyelids heavy, you realize the feast has done its work. It has filled not only stomachs, but time itself, carrying everyone gently from the urgency of day into the drowsy hush of night. The last bowls are scraped, the torches dim low, and the courtyard exhales like a tired giant. You sit still, feeling the warmth of food heavy in your belly, hearing only the faint murmur of voices winding down. The griots play softer now, their notes stretched and tender, as if tucking the empire itself into bed. The feast that began with clamor and spectacle now fades into a hush of contentment. Servants move with slow precision, stacking empty pottery, pouring the last cups of water, sweeping stray grains from mats. Nobles lean back against cushions, their boasts long since spent, their faces softened by drowsiness. Even the ambassadors, so astonished at the sight of rice mountains hours ago, now slump gently, pens forgotten, reports unfinished, lulled by fullness and music. Historians note that banquets often ended with blessings of rest, words offered to carry guests safely into the night. The quirky tidbit? Some travelers claim that after the biggest feast, nobles fell asleep right in the courtyard, their snores blending with drums until dawn. You smile at the thought, hearing faint echoes of such snores already creeping into the night. The griot lowers his voice to almost a whisper. The bowls are empty, but hearts are full. His fingers brush the chorus strings one last time, the note hanging in the air like a final grain of rice suspended before falling. And with that, the performance ends, not with applause, but with the silence of satisfaction. You lean back, eyes half closed, and let your breathing fall into rhythm with the night. The air is cool now, the sense of stew and sauce fading into the memory of smoke, rice, and salt. Above, stars scatter across the black sky, unhurried, eternal, as if watching the empire drift toward sleep. And so gently the wind down begins. The laughter softens, stretched thin as candle smoke. You imagine the rice bowls shrinking in memory, their towering heights reduced to gentle hills, then the flat fields waiting for next year's harvest. The music becomes a murmur, not something to stir you, but to cradle you, like waves lapping quietly at the shore. You picture farmers already asleep in villages, their dreams filled with rice shoots sprouting green. You picture caravans at rest in desert camps, camels folded into the sand like shadows. You picture the river flowing steady under the moon, carrying fish downstream, unbothered by the noise of human feasts. Everything continues, yet everything slows, like a wheel turning gradually to stillness. Your breath matches the cadence, in slow as a river, out long as a desert horizon. Even the voices around you sound like echoes now, stretched and blurred, fading into the distance. You can almost hear ancestors whispering lullabies in the steam that once rose from the bowls. The griot's last note lingers in your ears, softer than a sigh. The torches sputter one by one, stars replacing them overhead. The courtyard becomes less a place of food and more a vast chamber of dreams. And you, heavy with rice, wrapped in a hush of history, sink with everyone else into quiet rest.